I came home to find a stranger lounging in my pool chair, sipping a cocktail, and barking at her kids to stop splashing mommy's hair. At first, I thought I was hallucinating from the August heat. But no, there she was, a woman I'd later come to know as Karen, comfortably installed in my backyard oasis as if she'd signed a lease on it. The kicker? She waved at me with the smugness of someone greeting a guest at their pool party. "Oh, good you're here," she said. "We need more ice." That was the moment I realized I was not dealing with a neighbor having a slip in judgment. I was dealing with a full-blown invasion wrapped in entitlement. I froze on the patio, grocery bags digging into my hands, wondering which universe I had just stepped into. She didn't look remotely embarrassed, not even caught off guard. Her kids were splashing like they owned the deep end, and her SUV was parked half on my lawn, dripping pool floats out of the open trunk. My brain tried to calculate the odds. Had I accidentally left the gate unlocked? Had she climbed over? Had the HOA sold tickets to my backyard without telling me? But then Karen raised her oversized sunglasses, gave me a once-over, and added, "Your landscaping could really use some work. You should thank me for bringing life to this place." I wanted to laugh. Instead, I set the groceries down and asked the obvious. "Why are you in my pool?" She tilted her head like I had asked why the sun rises. "Because it's hot and you weren't using it," she said. Then, with a little scoff, "Pools are for the community." That word, community, was the first sign of trouble. I'd had run-ins with our HOA before, petty things about mailbox paint or garbage cans. But this was new territory. "I don't recall offering memberships," I said dryly. Karen just shrugged and returned to sipping her drink. I thought about calling the cops right then, but something about her confidence stopped me. People like her thrive on drama. They want the shouting, the chaos, the police at the gate because it lets them play the victim. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I walked inside, shut the blinds, and let her marinate in her arrogance. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. I've learned that the best way to handle entitled people isn't to fight them head-on, it's to let them hang themselves with their own rope. From that afternoon on, Karen treated my pool like her personal spa. I would catch her through the window, lounging with a parade of different friends, blasting music, sometimes even stringing up cheap tiki torches as if she were running a beach club. She never asked, never offered, just acted like it was her right. Every time I confronted her, she had a new excuse. She was keeping it in use, she was watching over the neighborhood kids, she was entitled as a dues-paying HOA member. The thing is, none of those arguments even made sense. Our HOA didn't have a shared pool, and my property was clearly fenced and deeded. But she had latched onto the fantasy that my backyard was the neighborhood's missing amenity, and she wasn't going to let go. Neighbors started to notice too. Some whispered sympathy, others gave me awkward looks as if I'd secretly invited her and just regretted it. That was Karen's genius. She created enough confusion to muddy the waters. And she played her role so well, strutting in and out of my gate like she was on official business, sometimes even scolding me for not maintaining her hours of operation. It would have been funny if it wasn't my water bill spiking and my property rights being stomped on. But the thing about me is, I don't escalate until I'm ready to end the game. And while Karen floated lazily in my pool, I was quietly documenting everything, dates, photos, even a video or two. I started calling my utility company, asking for itemized breakdowns. I spoke with a lawyer friend about trespassing and liability. Piece by piece, I built the case, never once tipping my hand. Because Karen didn't need to be told no. She needed to be told the price. The breaking point came one Saturday morning when I stepped outside to see not just Karen and her kids, but 5 adults I'd never met before grilling burgers on my patio. They dragged my furniture into a circle, set up coolers, and were treating my backyard like a public park. The audacity was Olympic level. One of them even asked me if I could bring out some extra chairs. That's when I knew the time for quiet observation was over. Karen wanted to play landlord of my pool. Fine. Landlords charge rent. And Karen was about to learn that water, electricity, cleaning, and trespassing all come with a bill, and mine was going to hit her like a cannonball. By the time the last hot dog wrapper floated in my skimmer, I had my plan. She wouldn't just get a warning. She would get an invoice. A detailed, itemized, undeniable invoice for every cent her arrogance had cost me. And I wouldn't just hand it to her. I'd make sure the entire neighborhood saw what happens when you turn someone else's backyard into your resort. That was the beginning of her $10,000 reality check. The first time I slipped the envelope under Karen's windshield wiper, I almost laughed at my own audacity. It wasn't a prank letter or a sarcastic note. It was a fully itemized invoice typed in crisp black font with my name and address neatly at the top. I even gave it a formal title: Statement of Charges, Unauthorized Use of Pool Facilities. I listed every cost I could justify: pool chemicals, water usage, electricity for the pump, furniture depreciation, property cleanup, labor fees for maintenance oversight, and a bold final line for trespassing liability adjustment. The total came to $10,437.62. I sealed it with tape and walked back inside, resisting the urge to peek from the blinds like a cartoon villain. Karen found it about an hour later. I heard her shriek through the double-paned windows. $10,000? Are you insane? She stormed up to my front door and pounded so hard I thought the hinges would give. I didn't answer. Not yet. I wanted her to stew, to realize that every smirk she'd thrown my way had an actual, measurable price tag. After a few minutes of yelling about fraud and community spirit, she stomped back to her SUV and screeched off, the invoice fluttering in her hand like a white flag she refused to wave. I expected her to back off. What I got instead was escalation. The next morning, I woke up to a fresh copy of the invoice taped to my garage door, but now with red marker scrawled across it. Nice try, loser. HOA rules. Pool is community property. She had even signed it with a little flourish, as if it were legally binding. It would have been comical if it weren't such a naked display of defiance. She wasn't retreating. She was doubling down. That week, Karen resumed her pool invasions as if nothing had changed. Only now, she acted bolder. She brought more guests, louder music, and even a collapsible table for beer pong. The bill hadn't scared her, it had challenged her. She wanted to prove that my attempt to draw boundaries was just theater. And in her twisted logic, every splash in my pool was proof that she had won. But what Karen didn't know was that I'd already spoken with an attorney. He laughed when I told him about the invoice. "You're not wrong to send it," he said, "but don't expect her to pay it willingly. People like her only respond when consequences stop being theoretical." He suggested I frame the invoice not as a bluff, but as evidence. Every trespassing incident, every guest, every documented cost. If I wanted to pursue damages, I needed to build a trail. "Think of it as preparing an exhibit for court," he advised. "Keep adding to it. Make it airtight. When she finally slips up, and she will, you'll be ready." So that's what I did. Every time Karen used my pool, I added a line. Water displacement from excess bathers, $58.33. Noise ordinance violation cleanup, $120. Unauthorized grilling on patio, $75. I even included a line item for psychological stress. It was absurd, yes, but it was also real. My quiet afternoons were shattered. My utility bills were inflated. My sense of privacy was hijacked. The absurdity wasn't in the invoice, it was in her entitlement. The neighbors started catching on. A few asked me quietly if it was true that I was charging Karen rent. I told them yes, and I showed them the running invoice, now 3 pages long. Some laughed, some shook their heads, and one even muttered, "About time someone stood up to her." That's when I realized Karen's reputation stretched farther than I knew. She had history. This wasn't her first rodeo. She had been the neighborhood dictator for years, policing garbage cans, reporting mailbox paint jobs, and harassing families about fence height. Everyone had a story, but no one had ever pushed back. Until me. Of course, Karen caught wind of the fact that people were talking. One afternoon, while she reclined in my pool chair as if auditioning for a commercial, she shouted across the yard, "You're embarrassing yourself, you know. Everyone's laughing at you. Nobody's going to pay your fake bills." I didn't respond. I just snapped another photo with a date-stamped app on my phone. Documentation over confrontation. She mistook my silence for weakness, and that was her fatal error. The next escalation was almost impressive in its pettiness. A week later, I got a letter in my mailbox. Not an official notice, but one printed on HOA letterhead, signed only the board. It claimed that my pool facility had been designated for neighborhood recreational use, and that my refusal to comply with community standards could result in fines. I read it 3 times, fighting laughter. The letterhead was clearly printed from a free template online, and the wording was just vague enough to be unenforceable. I knew the actual HOA president. He lived 2 streets over and hated Karen more than I did. A quick phone call confirmed my suspicion. The official notice was fake. Karen had manufactured it, probably hoping I'd cave under the illusion of authority. That was the moment the balance tipped. Until then, Karen's antics had been obnoxious but relatively contained. But forging HOA documents crossed into serious territory. It meant she was willing to commit fraud to maintain her delusion of pool ownership. It also meant I now had leverage. Real, tangible leverage that could turn my running invoice from a joke into a weapon. So I drafted a letter of my own. Polite. Professional. Deadly serious. I addressed it to Karen directly and included a copy of her fake HOA notice with "fraudulent document" stamped in bold red across the top. I explained, in painstaking detail, that impersonating an HOA board was a violation of both our community bylaws and state law. I listed the potential fines and legal consequences, complete with references. And then, at the bottom, I attached the updated invoice. $13,902.77. Payment due within 30 days, I wrote. Failure to remit may result in civil action. When I hand-delivered it to her mailbox, I knew I'd crossed a threshold. Karen could no longer pretend this was a casual neighborhood squabble. She had been caught forging, trespassing, and stealing services. She could try to spin it however she wanted, but the paper trail was undeniable. That evening, I saw her pacing in her driveway, clutching the letter. For the first time, her sunglasses were off, and she looked rattled. Not defeated, but rattled. Like someone who had finally realized the game wasn't as harmless as she thought. She shouted something across the street about lawyers and countersuing, but her voice cracked just enough to betray the panic. And yet, true to form, she didn't back down. The next day, she was back in my pool, floating on a gaudy flamingo raft, sipping wine at 11 in the morning. She yelled over the fence, "Nice paperwork, sweetheart. My lawyer will love it." But I noticed something different. Her laugh was forced. Her bravado was thinner. She wasn't untouchable anymore, she was stalling. The final straw came 2 days later, when one of her guests slipped on my wet patio and twisted his ankle. He yelped so loud half the block heard it. As Karen scrambled to help him, I calmly pulled out my phone and recorded the scene. Liability on tape. A non-resident injured on my property under her supervision. That was the moment the $10,000 invoice stopped being a joke and started being her nightmare. When the ambulance pulled away with Karen's limping guest in the back, the entire neighborhood had already gathered at the edge of my driveway. Some were pretending to walk their dogs, others lingered with coffee cups, openly gawking. Karen, who usually thrived on attention, looked cornered. Her flamingo raft was still floating in my pool behind her like a mocking prop from the crime scene. She paced with her phone pressed to her ear, loudly declaring that her lawyer was on the line. Of course, anyone within earshot could hear the robotic hold music playing through the speaker. I leaned against my porch railing and just watched, letting silence do the work. That evening, I printed another copy of the updated invoice, $15 $447.55, now including emergency response coordination and property damage from guest injury. I didn't tape it to her car this time. I mailed it, certified, with a return receipt requested. I wanted her signature on file, proof that she had accepted it. 2 days later, I had it. Her scribbled name, legally binding acknowledgement that she had received her bill. Whether she paid it or not, that signature meant something. The neighborhood gossip mill went into overdrive. Some folks whispered that I was a genius, others said I was poking the bear, but all of them were riveted. Karen, for her part, doubled down on theatrics. She held loud conversations in her driveway about frivolous lawsuits and con artists who think they can scam hardworking mothers. She positioned herself as a martyr, cornered by an unhinged neighbor. And yet, every time she saw me, her eyes flicked with that telltale twitch of unease. She knew I wasn't bluffing. The HOA president stopped by one evening, shaking his head with a kind of weary amusement. "I've had more calls about her in the past week than in the past year combined," he said. "Half the neighborhood wants me to take her side, the other half wants me to take yours." He sipped the beer I handed him and added, "What they don't realize is, the board has nothing to do with this. She's freelancing her own disaster." Then he leaned in with a grin. "But if you want me to write a letter clarifying that the pool isn't community property, I'd be happy to." I accepted, of course. Within 3 days, an official HOA notice arrived. This one reel, stating in blunt terms that my property was private, non-shared, and not subject to community use. It was copied to every house in the neighborhood. That document was my trump card. The moment Karen's neighbors read it, her narrative started to crack. People stopped nodding politely when she ranted. Parents stopped letting their kids follow her into my yard. She was losing her audience, and for someone like Karen, that was a fate worse than paying the bill. But Karen wasn't finished. If she couldn't win through charm or bluffing, she would win through intimidation. One night, around 11 p.m., my security camera caught her slipping through my gate with a pair of scissors. She snipped the certified invoice into tiny pieces, stuffed them in an envelope, and shoved it through my mail slot. No note, no words, just shredded confetti falling onto my floor. I rewound the footage twice, marveling at how much rage she carried in those deliberate cuts. Instead of confronting her, I uploaded the video to the neighborhood Facebook group with a simple caption, "In case anyone was wondering why our water bills are skyrocketing." I didn't mention her name. I didn't have to. Everyone recognized the patterned blouse, the chunky sandals, the unmistakable stride. Comments flooded in. Some were angry. Some were delighted. A few called her Pool Pirate Karen. The video spread faster than I expected, and by the next morning, even people from outside our subdivision were sharing it. Karen had wanted an audience. Now she had one, but not on her terms. The pressure mounted. That week, I noticed her car parked farther from her driveway, as if hiding. She wore oversized hats, avoided eye contact, and yelled less in public. It was as if she thought invisibility could undo months of arrogance. But her facade cracked again when I found yet another fake notice taped to my door, this time claiming I owed her $2,500 for defamation, harassment, and illegal billing. The letterhead was laughably bad, complete with misspelled legal terms and a signature that looked like a child's doodle. It was the act of someone drowning, grasping at anything to pull herself back up. My lawyer friend nearly fell out of his chair laughing when I showed him. "She's handing you everything," he said. "Fraud, trespassing, harassment, it's all on paper now. Keep documenting. At this point, she's your best witness." He suggested I prepare a small claims case, not because we'd necessarily need to file it, but because the mere act of serving her could end the circus. "Nothing scares people like a summons," he said. I took his advice. Over the next week, I gathered every photo, every video, every fake notice, and every itemized invoice. I organized it into a binder thicker than a phone book. Each page was in a plastic sleeve, tabbed and labeled. It was absurdly meticulous, and I knew Karen would hate it. Entitled people thrive on chaos. Documentation kills them. The breaking point came at the next HOA community meeting. Karen showed up late, strutting in as if she were the keynote speaker. She took a seat in the front row, crossed her arms, and waited until the president opened the floor for concerns. Then she exploded. "This man," she shouted, pointing at me, "has been harassing my family, stalking us, and trying to scam me out of $10,000 with fake invoices." Her voice carried across the gymnasium, echoing off the walls. Parents hushed their kids, neighbors leaned forward, and for a moment it felt like I was on trial. I stood up slowly, binder in hand, and walked to the microphone. "I'd like to respond," I said calmly. The president nodded. I opened the binder to the first tab and held up the certified receipt with Karen's signature. Then I flipped to the photos of her parties, the forged HOA notices, and finally, the video of her shredding the invoice in my entryway. Each page landed on the projector screen behind me, thanks to the HOA's setup for visual aid. Gasps rippled through the room. By the time I finished, Karen's face was redder than the exit signs. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The president cleared his throat. "Well," he said, "I think it's safe to say the pool is not community property. And Karen, I'd strongly suggest you speak with an attorney before writing any more notices." The room erupted in awkward laughter, then applause. Not for me, just for the absurdity of it all finally being exposed. Karen stormed out, muttering about lawsuits and conspiracies, but the damage was done. She had lost her audience for good. Or so I thought. 2 days later, I woke up to find my pool a murky green mess. Someone had dumped bags of fertilizer into it overnight, turning the water into a chemical swamp. My first thought wasn't anger, it was anticipation. Because what Karen didn't know was that my new security cameras caught every second of her late-night sabotage. And this time, the footage wasn't just for the neighbors. It was going straight to the police. The footage from the new security cameras was crystal clear. At 2:17 a.m., Karen crept through the gate in her oversized hoodie, dragging 2 heavy bags that sloshed when she set them down. She crouched by the edge of the pool, ripped them open, and dumped the contents, grainy white fertilizer pellets, into the water. She even paused halfway through to take a sip from a wine tumbler, as if poisoning my pool was just another item on her nightly routine. When she left, she didn't rush. She strutted out, shoulders squared, the same smug posture she'd used walking into my yard 100 times before. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, I felt something shift inside me. Up until then, I'd been playing the long game, relying on invoices, documentation, and neighborhood exposure. But this wasn't petty trespassing anymore. This was vandalism. Intentional property damage. Potentially even reckless endangerment. If a kid had wandered in and swum in that water, the chemicals could have burned their skin. Karen had finally crossed a line that not even the most sympathetic neighbor could ignore. I called the non-emergency police line, explained the situation, and emailed them the footage. The officer who showed up that afternoon whistled low as he watched the video on my laptop. "That's pretty cut and dry," he said. "You've got her on tape. She can't spin her way out of this." He took my statement, filed a report, and promised that a detective would follow up. As he left, he gave me a look that was half amusement, half disbelief. "I've been doing this job 15 years, he said, "and I've never seen someone vandalize a neighbor's pool with fertilizer. Good luck with this one." Word spread fast. By evening, half the neighborhood knew Karen had been reported to the police. Some people were gleeful, others nervous, but no one was defending her anymore. She tried, of course. She stood in her driveway shouting that the video was doctored, that I was running a smear campaign, and that the HOA was corruptly aligned against her. But the more she shouted, the less people listened. Her credibility had evaporated. Still, Karen wasn't the type to retreat gracefully. That weekend, I got a letter in the mail. This one typed on actual legal stationery from a real law office. It was short and blunt. Karen was threatening to sue me for defamation, invasion of privacy, and emotional distress. For a second, my stomach dropped. Unlike her forged HOA notices, this was real. But when I called the firm listed on the letterhead, the receptionist sighed and said, "Oh, you're the pool case. Don't worry, it's just a standard demand letter." She insisted we send it, but she hasn't actually retained us. Unless she pays the retainer, we won't be doing anything further. That made me laugh out loud. Karen had wasted her dwindling resources on an empty threat. But I didn't laugh for long, because the police called me back 2 days later. The detective wanted me to come down to the station to give a formal statement and provide copies of the footage. "We'll be charging her with criminal mischief and trespassing," he said. "Given the evidence, the DA will probably take it." I spent an hour at the station, handing over everything: videos, invoices, photos, even the fake HOA letters. The detective flipped through the binder I'd prepared and raised an eyebrow. "You've basically done our job for us," he said. "This is airtight." For the first time in months, I felt a surge of relief. This wasn't just my private battle anymore. The law was involved. Karen couldn't just gaslight her way out of it. When the officers showed up at her door later that week, I didn't see it firsthand, but I heard it. Karen's screams echoed across the block. Neighbors peeked through curtains as the police explained the charges. She wasn't arrested, at least not then, but she was served with a summons to appear in court. The sight of her pacing the driveway afterward, shrieking into her phone about corruption and fake news, was almost surreal. This was the same woman who once told me my lawn ornaments were bringing down property values. Now she was facing actual criminal charges for dumping fertilizer in my pool. Of course, Karen being Karen, she couldn't resist spinning the narrative. She went on a rant in the neighborhood Facebook group, claiming I had framed her, that I'd hired actors to impersonate her on camera, and that I was weaponizing the justice system to silence women. The post backfired spectacularly. Comment after comment piled in, not in her defense, but mocking her. One neighbor wrote, "If you were framed, how come the actor wears the same sandals you wore to the HOA meeting last month?" Another added, "Who carries fertilizer in a wine tumbler?" The post was deleted within hours, but the screenshots lived forever. Meanwhile, the damage to my pool wasn't cheap to fix. The chemicals had corroded the pump system, and the water had to be drained, cleaned, and refilled. The repair bill alone was nearly $5,000. I added it to her invoice, bringing the total to a staggering $20,438.92. I mailed her another certified copy, this time with a cover letter. "This will be submitted as part of the civil claim. Payment due within 30 days. Her response was predictable. She stormed onto my property, waving the invoice like a white-hot brand. "You're a joke," she screamed. "You think anyone's going to take this seriously? You think you're going to ruin me? I'm untouchable." I didn't even look up from my phone. "Say that again," I murmured, tapping the record button. She did, louder, angrier, spittle flying. When she noticed I was recording, she lunged for my phone. That was her second mistake. Because lunging at me, on my property, while already under investigation, was just more fuel for the fire. I filed for a restraining order the next day. Between the vandalism, the trespassing, and the physical aggression, the judge granted it without hesitation. Karen was legally barred from coming within 50 feet of me or my property, which meant, for the first time in months, she couldn't set foot near my pool. The silence was deafening. For 2 whole weeks, my backyard was mine again. No floating flamingos, no screeching kids, no unsolicited HOA decrees. I almost let myself believe it was over. But people like Karen don't vanish. They regroup. Her regrouping came in the form of a countersuit. She filed in small claims court, accusing me of harassment, defamation, and loss of reputation. The irony nearly broke me. She was suing me for the reputation she had obliterated all by herself. But instead of panicking, I prepared. I had the invoices, the videos, the police reports, and the restraining order. She had well bluster. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed with curious neighbors who had taken off work just to watch the showdown. Karen strutted in with a stack of loose papers, half of them crumpled printouts of Facebook posts. She addressed the judge with the same arrogance she used to yell at kids for chalk drawings on the sidewalk. "Your Honor, this man has been terrorizing me," she declared. "He's sending me fake bills, he's stalking my family, he's spreading lies on the internet. He's turned this entire neighborhood against me." The judgment came down 2 weeks later in a crisp white envelope stamped with the county seal. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, slid it open, and read every line carefully. The judge had awarded me just over $18,000 in damages, citing trespassing, vandalism, and unauthorized use of property. It wasn't the full $20,438.92 I had invoiced, but it was close enough to sting. More importantly, it was binding. Karen now owed me real money, not a fake bill, not a neighborhood joke. Actual damages enforced by the court. I almost laughed at how surreal it felt. Months ago, Karen had waved at me from my own pool chair and demanded more ice. Now, a legal document said she owed me nearly 20 grand. It wasn't vindication in the cinematic sense. No applause, no villainous meltdown in the courtroom, but it was real, and real was better. Real meant enforceable. Real meant the sheriff's office could get involved. Real meant Karen's arrogance had finally hit a wall she couldn't talk her way around. The first sign that she had read the judgment was the way she stopped shouting in her driveway. For weeks, her voice had been a daily soundtrack, complaints about conspiracies, about my obsession with her, about the fake evidence. But after the ruling, silence. The flamingo raft disappeared from the pool, her SUV stayed in the garage, and the curtains in her windows stayed drawn. The only sound I heard from her house was the occasional muffled slam of a door. I wasn't naive enough to think that silence meant surrender. Entitled people like Karen don't back down, they calcify. They sulk. They plot. And sure enough, the first tactic she tried was avoidance. She didn't pay. The 30-day deadline came and went without a dime. When I sent a polite reminder letter, it came back unopened, the envelope marked "Return to Sender" in black marker. When I knocked on her door one afternoon, I heard footsteps pause on the other side and then retreat deeper into the house. She wasn't going to pay willingly. Fortunately, the law doesn't rely on willingness. My attorney helped me file for a wage garnishment order, and within a few weeks, her paycheck had a court-ordered bite taken out of it. I didn't know exactly where she worked until then, but the garnishment paperwork made it official. She was an office manager at a dental practice in town. The first time I saw the deposit hit my account, $423.17, I nearly spit out my drink. It wasn't much, but it was symbolic. My pool, my yard, my peace of mind had been invaded, and now every 2 weeks, a slice of her labor would pay me back. When Karen realized what was happening, she erupted. I heard her screaming on her porch to someone over the phone, shrill and panicked. "They're stealing my paycheck. They can't do this. This is fraud." She didn't understand that it wasn't me doing it. It was the court, the system she thought she was above. I almost felt sorry for her in that moment, but then I remembered the fertilizer swirling in my pool and the fake HOA letters, and the sympathy evaporated. Her next move was predictable. She tried to rally the neighborhood, framing herself as the victim of a vindictive smear campaign. She went door to door with a stack of flyers declaring, "If this can happen to me, it can happen to you." Most neighbors listened politely, some closed the door, and a few even texted me photos of the flyer with laughing emojis. One neighbor scrawled, "Pay your bills, Karen," in red Sharpie across their copy and taped it back to her mailbox. That picture made the neighborhood Facebook group and went viral faster than anything I had ever posted. The garnishment went on for months. Each deposit was another reminder that Karen had lost. And yet, she still tried to save face. She bought a cheaper car, stopped hosting parties, and cut back on her theatrics, but she never admitted defeat. Sometimes I'd catch her glaring at me from across the street, arms crossed, as if sheer hatred could undo the legal system. Other times she'd shout nonsense like, "Hope you enjoy my hard-earned money," when the mail came. I'd just nod and smile. It was hard to argue with someone funding your pool repairs against their will. The true poetic justice came in the summer, almost a year after the saga began. I hosted a barbecue for the neighbors, the first time I'd opened my yard since the chaos. The pool was sparkling clean, freshly repaired, and filled with kids splashing happily. Parents sat on the patio laughing, passing plates of burgers, enjoying the space Karen had once tried to claim as her kingdom. As the sun set, someone raised a toast, to finally having peace and quiet around here. Everyone clinked their cups. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch, arms folded, watching. She didn't say a word, but her face was twisted with a bitterness so sharp you could feel it from 50 feet away. For once, she had no audience, no supporters, no voice. The neighborhood had moved on, and she was the punchline of her own story. That night, after everyone left, I sat by the pool with the last beer from the cooler and thought about how it had all spiraled. It started with a woman in oversized sunglasses demanding more ice. It ended with court orders, garnished wages, and a neighborhood united against her antics. It wasn't the dramatic showdown I once imagined, it was slower, quieter, the kind of justice that builds brick by brick until there's no air left for the entitled to breathe. In the end, the $10,000 invoice wasn't just a joke or a power play. It became real. It became the lever that pried open every lie, every fraud, every arrogant claim. And the beauty of it was that Karen had built the case against herself. All I did was keep the receipt. The flamingo raft never returned. The tiki torches never reappeared. My yard became mine again, and Karen faded into a cautionary tale whispered at HOA meetings and backyard gatherings. Sometimes, new neighbors would hear fragments of the story and ask me, "Wait, is it true someone actually took over your pool?" I'd smile, sip my drink and reply, "Oh, it's true." And it cost her $10,000 to find out whose pool it really was. But the truth, the deeper truth, was this: it cost her far more than money. It cost her her reputation, her standing, her illusion of control. And me? It bought me peace, silence, and the sweetest revenge of all, watching the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood dethroned, one garnished paycheck at a time.